What is going on, you guys? AK-40 Kevin here in the gamer heaven, and today we are going to talk about the PS5 versus the Xbox Series X, Microsoft versus our Sony brethren, and how the current hardware is going to stack up, as we are completely confirmed as to what hardware, what components are going into these two amazing machines, and I want to see how they're going to stack up against each other. And then at the very end, I'm going to give you guys my thoughts, my semi-professional analysis as to how I think these consoles are going to stack up against each other and what it means for the future of console gaming, as well as how it's going to make PC gaming step their game up a little bit as well, which is very nice. So first of all, the Xbox Series X gameplay reveal is going to be revealing 28 games live here in the near future. I have a little clip of a little screenshot of that on the screen right now. I'll be covering the highlights of that event. Was going to do it live, however, I do have a day job, and unfortunately that's going to be during that time. So as soon as I get home, I'm going to put together my notes and cover all the highlights and main features of that event. So any conferences and events relating to the next generation consoles, please believe I'm going to be covering it. So subscribe, tallywhack that bell, stay in the loop with the latest changes between these two developers, butting heads and getting knuckles deep. So first of all, we'll start with backward compatibility, because a lot of us have a lot of current console games as well as games from previous generations. So of course, Xbox is going to have full backward compatibility support, meaning you can put an Xbox One or Xbox original disc or an Xbox 360 game into your Series X. It's not going to cough on it, scratch it up, and spit it out. PS5, not so much. You can go all the way back as, wait for it, PS4, so the current generation, and not even all those titles. Only about half the library is actually going to work. Now, you can go to the PSN store and purchase games that you've already owned a second time if you do enjoy double paying for games that you've already owned. Not too much of a fan of that, so Microsoft, of course, has been killing the game with backward compatibility since the dawn of time. So we're going to start with, we're going to go component by component. We're going to start with the CPU, which in a console is actually called an APU, but it's the equivalent of what a CPU would be in a computer. So the PS5 is rocking an 8-core Ryzen-based processor. It's an 8 Zen core with hyper-threading. It's basically the equivalent of a Ryzen 7 3700X, which is a pretty damn good CPU. However, it's running at a slightly lower clock speed of up to 3.5 gigahertz. When I say up to, I mean it's a boost clock, and we're going to talk about that in detail in just a minute. Actually, right now. So the clock speeds are actually variable, so they have a base and boosted clock in the PS5, much like a gaming PC. What that means is that unlike the Xbox that has a fixed clock speed of 3.6 gigahertz with the multi-threading, or 3.8 if you turn it off, it's not going to have the same level of consistency. So when game developers are designing games, they have a specific target for the Xbox Series X so they can actually push games to their limitations, because they know what the ceiling is, where the roof is for what can be pushed on this hardware. Now, the PS5 can go up to 3.6 gigahertz. However, with throttling due to heat and excess load through multiple applications running in the background and whatnot, it can be substantially less than that, unfortunately. So the Xbox CPU and GPU, or integrated into what's called an APU, runs at a steady clock speed all the time of 3.6 gigahertz with multi-threading, or go in the settings, turn that off for single core performance at 3.8 gigahertz. So think of it as going into your PC's BIOS and setting a overclock and then having it run at that speed at all times. And that's the consistency that you're getting with the Xbox, as where PS5 can be all over the place. So that steady clock speed gives game developers a specific number to fine-tune games to, so they know exactly where the ceiling is, where the performance roof is when they're designing these games, as where the same developers working on PS5 games know that it can have a good boost speed, but only for a very short burst of time. So a scene where there's a lot going on, really long draw distances, wide open scale and scope of environment, stuff like that. And we also know that additional heat and excess load is going to cause it to basically throttle back to keep from frying its egg. So getting away from the CPU, which clearly seems like the Xbox is well ahead, the graphics side of the house, or the GPU that's integrated in that APU, the PS5's GPU is capped at a 2.23 gigahertz benchmark, or 10.3 teraflops, and runs nearly the identical RDNA 2 structure that the Xbox Series X is running. The pic on the screen is kind of a cheat sheet that shows you how all these components communicate. through AMD Smart Shift, which basically turns a GPU and CPU into an APU. So the PS5, nitty gritty numbers, 36 CUs, whatever the hell those are, 2.23 boost clock, again, boost clock, of up to 10.8 teraflops, which is basically when you put flip-flops together, they become teraflops. The Xbox has 52 CUs, so that's a bigger number. It's got to be more powerful. And a consistent 1825 megahertz and 12 teraflops. So not much of a mathematician. All those numbers seem a little bit bigger on the green side. So in layman's terms, what this means is that the PS5 is running a smaller APU GPU at higher clock speeds. The perks of this smaller GPU would be that it's easier to cool, so probably a more quiet and smaller console in your living room. And it's also cheaper to manufacture, or at least it was prior to the lack of components coming in from China due to COVID-19. So now PS5 is going to be right there neck and neck with the Xbox Series X, which, by the way, spoiler alert, is about 25 to 30% more powerful. No real surprise there. I'm not a fanboy or anything like that. As you see, I'm wearing a PlayStation hat here, so I've got to be a PlayStation fan, and I am. I have both consoles. I've been playing on both of them for years. I also play on PC. I'm just a big nerd, and I love games in general, but I'm going to give you guys what you want, which is the nitty-gritty specs. At the end, I'll give you my opinion if you want to care to stick around for that. So as for storage, where's the backpack where you're going to stash all these big old game files? Well, both consoles are rocking lightning-fast SSDs or solid-state drives, which is a huge step up from previous or current generation consoles. It's basically going to make load times substantially faster. Load times loading games, as well as making in-game worlds bigger because files can be shared back and forth between the hard drive storage and the RAM, or random access memory, lightning fast, which is going to make games basically be able to run a lot closer to current high-end PCs, which is phenomenal. So the PS5 has a dedicated and custom to the Sony PlayStation 825 gigabyte. I know it's a very off number. Usually it'd be like 500 or a terabyte, but 825 PCIe 4 SSD that can transfer a whopping 5.5 gigabytes a second. Not too shabby. But unfortunately, that isn't all usable storage. There's a lot of that's dedicated for the operating system files, and modern games are very big, so you're going to fill that up pretty quickly. Probably 3 to 4 AAA titles and you're full. So what are you going to do? You can plug in an old external hard drive, but that's going to be so slow, half the games won't even run as they're designed to on the current console. So Sony has made this additional PCIe 4 slot that you can buy chips for. However, there are no specific dedicated chips at launch or even in the near foreseeable future after launch. So you're going to have to go to the PC market and find one. The trick there is finding one that'll actually fit in that tiny PCIe slot on the PS5 chassis, and also has enough cooling to not fry its egg in there. So the Xbox is also running a PCIe 4 SSD, most likely a terabyte. Don't have a specific solidified number at this point, but I'm gonna venture a guess and say a terabyte. That's going to divide speed assigned to memory according to the spec sheet on screen, which will give you GPU memory for in-game as well as background tasks for the operating system and whatnot. And they are actually going to have storage expansion chips available at launch if you want to whip out the wallet and pay a hefty fee, which kind of stings after spending so much on a brand new console. So now on to the memory. So not the storage, but the RAM, or random access memory, which is the fast memory that pops up when you're getting in and out of games and stuff like that. Both consoles are rocking 16 gigabytes of GDDR6, which is shown here on screen, and it's going to be much faster than what we're used to with current generation consoles. But as you see in the side-by-side graph here, it's substantially faster on the green team. Now, from an audio standpoint, PlayStation's working some black magic over there with what they call Tempest audio drivers, which has been described as ray tracing for audio. But we'll see how many developers actually make use of this when designing games. It seems like kind of a gimmick, and it's never been seen before, so developers really aren't going to know what to do with it. They're probably just going to bake in the same audio files they've been doing for decades. Xbox is running a very similar unnamed audio suite that's probably also going to taste quite sweet. As for your living room centerpiece, it is going to have a 100 gigabyte Blu-ray drive, which now supports 4K Ultra Blu-rays. Same thing in the Xbox, so you can always pop in a movie and cuddle up with that significant other, or just Netflix and chill yourself. So in conclusion here, boys, the Xbox is going to be about 25% consistently at all times faster than the PS5. However, that could go up to about 30% if the PS5 suffers from throttling, which it will under those heavy loads or during some intense scenes in games. Now, this is a big one for me. The Xbox is also going to have active ray tracing like we've only seen in some of the high-end graphics cards like the 2080 Ti, and we're going to be able to access that for literally a fraction of the price of a high-end gaming PC. The PS5, not so much on the ray tracing. I'm sure they're going to do some voodoo, some black magic trickery over there to make sure the textures and environments are comparable to the Xbox, but honest, true native ray tracing is basically like inserting yourself into a virtual world that has a true day and night cycle. Weather affects every single particle within the game. Light bleeds through leaves in a realistic manner. If you've seen a ray tracing demo on a 4K or 8K monitor at like an event, it truly is breathtaking. So the controllers for these two consoles, I am going to have a separate video with a side-by-side comparison because that's a video in its own. There's a lot to cover there. As for the actual design of the console, so the case, what it looks like, the Xbox basically looks like a little gaming PC because that is what it is. It needs those large vapor chambers to cool the beastly guts of this bad boy. And at its core, it is a high-end gaming PC for the casual console user, which I think may look a little bit awkward in most living rooms considering it's basically like a little PC tower. I don't know how that's going to fit in a lot of people's entertainment stand. I don't even know if you can lay it on its side without causing damage to the internals. The PS5, due to a smaller APU, CPU, GPU, basically smaller, less powerful, but also smaller components, it's going to require less cooling in there too, less fans. So it's probably going to be a substantially smaller and sleeker design and probably look a lot better in most people's living rooms. So get your guys' coin purses out because I'm going to go ahead and throw my 2 cents. I feel like the Xbox is going to be on par with high-end gaming PCs, mid-high to high-end gaming PCs for literally a fraction of the cost. Now, this is great because it's going to push PC developers to integrate the same CPU and GPU combinations that are in these new generation consoles. I made a video about 6 months ago when this technology was introduced, but the Series X is using this new... It's very scientific. It's quite a scientific equation, but it basically allows the GPU to have almost an unboundless amount of random access graphic memory, pretty much unheard of in the PC gaming world. So very impressive, and I feel like the technology that's baked into these two consoles is going to push the PC peripheral and component companies to the next level and probably try and keep it a little bit more price savvy with the consoles, if possible, obviously depending on the price of production with the silicon chips and all that. So when you add up the CPU, GPU, the RAM, all that other stuff, you're looking at about a 20 to 30% power gap between the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 over here. So here's how it comes down to me. Sony's rallying on some high-end exclusives and fan loyalty to keep them competitive with Microsoft. As for me, I do love sheer power, but I also do love classic Sony games as well as, it's very near and dear to my rear because it's basically the first console I ever played. I had a Sega Genesis and a Super Nintendo and whatnot, but the first console that I really grew up on was PlayStation 1, then PlayStation 2, then PlayStation 3, then PS4, and then, I had never had a 360, then I got an Xbox One, then I traded in my PlayStation and had no PlayStation for about 2 years and had a Xbox One S, traded that for an Xbox One X. Now I have the One X and a PS4, and this next generation I just got to get both because they seem like real powerhouses. But to me, I feel like the Xbox is going to get turned on a lot more. I'm not saying it's going to turn me on a lot more, but it's going to get powered on. It's going to get juiced up a lot more because it's just such a powerhouse. So if games are available for both, between the traditional Xbox controllers feeling ergonomically better in my hand between size, and I like the offset sticks, not lateral sticks, I'm probably going to push that ray tracing and just play games on the Xbox. Now, if there is a bomb-ass exclusive, I'm going to have to play it on PS5. Speaking of exclusives, sorry, it's not The Last of Us 2. I have a video I posted the other day. That game is going to suck. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Please like and tallywhack that bell. and you'll get notified when new videos come out. I'm covering all the events and upcoming news surrounding these awesome consoles, as well as any news around game company takeovers. For example, Corsair just bought Scuff Gaming. That means quite a bit for the premium controller realm, you guys. So I will see you guys in the next one, and be sure to keep your eyes peeled on the blue and the green team, as they are getting real mean, and these machines will be lean. Should have been a rapper. All right, guys. Peace.